All right, let's get started today, guys. So before I go into my whole spiel today, I wanted you to think about how your week has been. So everybody's going to have had different experiences this past week, and I really want you to think about a few bits of it and how it's gone for you. And the three questions that I want you to answer, and I need you to write down a response to each of these, are these three up here. So what have you done well this past week? And it could be as simple as I've been really organised, I've had a plan, I've cooked ahead of time. What have you done really well this week? What are you proud of over the past week? What have you done differently that you maybe didn't expect that you would be able to do, and it makes you feel quite proud? Like, I don't know, maybe you're a mum and you didn't eat your kids' leftovers. And something simple, doesn't have to be this big great achievement, just something that you can be proud of. And number three, what has surprised you this past week? Maybe it's the decrease in your hunger. Maybe it's how tasty the food actually is, how much easier it was than you anticipated. So what has surprised you? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to jot down a few things that come to mind in response. So just on the back of that sheet of paper that you've got a blank page there. So just write on the back there a response to each of those. Is anybody willing to share a few responses there? So maybe somebody share what you think you've done well this week.
Eating to plan without deviation.
Fantastic.
Stuck to the list.
Right.
And number two was just being prepared with your meals for the family.
Yep.
Feel good that you've done all of them are eating the same.
Right.
And number three was probably...
So you had the whole family eating.
They're all eating. We're prepping on a Sunday for the kids as well for their school lunches, boiling eggs, doing everything so that they can take their stuff.
Right.
And they notice a difference too, especially my daughter. Yeah.
Yeah. And how old are your kids?
15 and 13. Daughter 15. Yeah.
Yep.
She suffers with a lot of IBS type issues, so the bloating was almost gone.
Fantastic.
So that was brilliant. And number three, what surprised us was the small amount you really actually do eat when you add the fat. Yes. You can't eat 3 meals.
Yes.
And you don't want to snack.
Yep.
That's
great.
the difference. Yeah.
Great responses. Anybody else got something to add to that? Yeah.
Just having 3 meals a day was a big achievement.
Yes.
That's number one.
With no snacking, you mean?
Yeah, no
yes.
snack. Well, I miss breakfast or miss lunch or just being committed to that.
Yes.
Number two was sticking to the measurements and using the scales just to really get used to what the quantities were.
Yep.
And number three, I think I might be wrong, but I just was overwhelmed by the quantity of food.
Okay, so you felt there was quite a lot.
Yeah, especially on the green list, like, if you're measuring out 100 grams of broccoli.
It's a lot.
I know.
Yes, you don't need that much. No. So it doesn't add up all that quickly.
No. I was really shocked at that.
Yeah. Good. All right. Dina, I think you have something.
I was just going to say for number three, I was really surprised at how yummy cauliflower rice is and zucchini spaghetti.
Yeah, it's not bad, is it?
That's really well.
It's surprising how good things taste when you put a bit of fat with them.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm loving these responses. They're very typical, and I hope everybody who hasn't responded is sort of feeling similar things. And I see lots of nodding, so that's great. So we're at sort of a transition point here today, and especially if you've been doing low carb before, you might be at that point that you feel like you're ready to take it a little bit of a step further, identify more specifically what your macronutrient breakdown should be, so how much fat, how much protein, etc. Or you might be on the other side where you're going, look, this is really working really well for me now. I've not hit a wall, I've not hit a plateau, I'm feeling really good, and so I'm just going to keep doing exactly what I've been doing for the past week. And either one of those is going to be absolutely fine. This is where we need to start shifting things for individuals. So particularly if this is new to you and you've only done this for a week, then I'd say the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, you might only start implementing in a week or 2 weeks or 6 weeks' time, when you feel like, you know, you've come as far as you can without getting specific. So there are some people who never have to get specific, who just increase the fat, decrease the carbs, and everything falls into place. The weight comes off, they feel energized, from a health point of view everything's good, and then that person never needs to count anything. And I apologize to the females, but most of the time that happens to males. They're less complicated for many different reasons, but males tend to be able to fall into a pattern without having to weigh and measure. And there's many reasons that that might occur. So females often do need to get more specific and do a little bit more counting and controlling. So that's what we're going to speak about today, like how do we do that exactly, and what are we looking for? Now, everything I speak about today is still in a context of a very low carbohydrate diet. So we are still, no matter where you are, keeping your carbs below 50 grams. And I would suggest that you keep them there for the duration of this 6 weeks. And after that point in time, you might, dependent on how you believe you are in regards to being insulin sensitive or insulin resistant, increase them from that point onwards. I wouldn't recommend increasing them beyond 50 grams until then, because it's going to take you that long to really get yourself adapted to this way of eating, at a minimum, really. So, all of this in the context of being low carb. So in front of you, you've got this optimizing your macronutrient little information sheet. And if you're watching this at home, well then you're going to print this off of the Dropbox folder and you're going to reference this as we go along. Now before I go into all the details on there, I want to explain this to you in a little bit of a diagram form, which should hopefully help you make a little bit more sense of all of this. So what we are speaking about first is fat. So we're going to come back and speak about protein next, but we're going to speak about fat first. And often there's the question like, oh, you told me that I can just eat as much fat, you know, as you want to, so that you feel satisfied. But how much is that really? Like, can I overeat fat? So this is the answer to your question. This is the long answer to your question. So down on this end, we're going to have 4 different types of people. Down on this end is the person who just wants to maintain their weight, all right? You are happy with where you are in regards to your weight, nothing else, just your weight. Over here is the person who we might classify as being overweight. So for this person, you're looking at losing, 5 kilos, something like that, maybe up to 10 kilos. So nothing that we in the weight loss industry would call significant. That's you, there, that next column. This one here, and I don't like these words, but they do help me to understand things or talk about things. This is the obese category. This is where people are needing to lose more than 10 kilos to get themselves into what they believe is a healthy weight range. And then on this bit over here is people who carry in excess of 50 kilos plus. So people who have a significant amount of weight to lose. And each of these people in each of these categories need to approach fat quite differently, all right? So what these circles over here represent is your energy expenditure. Do we understand that word, energy expenditure? Maybe not properly. So your energy expenditure is how much you expend, how much you use in your day-to-day activities. So how much fuel you require to function on a daily basis. That is to move and to concentrate and to breathe and to function as a living being. We all have what we call a certain amount of energy expenditure. If you are very active, your energy expenditure will be greater. If you are very sedentary, your energy expenditure is lower. But in reality, we can only alter our energy expenditure with exercise, very small percentage. Most of our energy expenditure is related to our basic functions to keep us alive. Okay, so that's what I'm referring to when I talk about energy expenditure. So what our fuels contribute, carbohydrate, protein and fat, then give us the energy to function. So what percentages are we sort of looking at here? So we're following a low carb diet, and so the amount of energy that we are receiving from carbohydrates is only a really tiny portion of this pie, yeah? So this is so the red one over here is going to represent your carbs. So this is how much energy each of these people are receiving from carbohydrate, because they're all restricting carbs, okay? The next one is protein, and I know we've discussed protein not really contributing to your fuel, but it's still going to be there as part of this picture. And so we're going to estimate that for all of us, protein is going to give us this chunk over here. So this is protein, and for all of us, we're estimating it's about 20%. Okay. And then we've got two more categories. Yeah, I know we've only got 3 macronutrients, but we've got 2 more categories that contribute. The one category, which we'll have in green, is going to be fat in food, or fat from food, and the other one, the orange one, is going to be body fat. Okay, so this person, we'll start off here because this person's easiest to understand. This person doesn't need to lose any weight. They are maintaining weight. And therefore the remainder of this is all green. All of that is coming from food. So this person can eat all of their fat calories. Okay? Now we're going to move up a notch. This next person wants to lose a little bit of weight, a little bit in comparison to the others. So 5 to 10 kilos approximately. So this person is going to have the vast majority coming from food, but they're going to have a portion over here which is going to come from body fat. Therefore, this person is eating less fat than this person. Does that make sense to everybody? And so we're going to move down. And so this might look like that, and that's orange there. And then this one might look like that. So that, for this person, 50% of their fat that they are using is coming from their body, not from food. Now, a big but here. If you are not fat adapted, meaning that you are eating carbohydrates and burning carbs as fuel, this is completely irrelevant, okay? Because you'll just store the fat and you're not going to use it. But when you are fat adapted, so when your body has learnt how to use fat, it will use fat from food and it will use fat from your body. It will use fat from wherever you're supplying it. But its first choice is going to be the fat from the food. So if you overfeed yourself the fat from the food, you're not going to burn your body fat because you don't need to. All right. So each of you can for yourself sort of think about where you are right now and start thinking about, where does this sit for you? Because the last week, I've told all of you to do this. And most of you, I don't know if you've weighed yourselves, but most of you would have got on the scales if you did, and you would have probably lost weight on the scale this last week. And that weight would probably, depending on your size, would range from 1 to 2, even up to 3 kilos, and it happens pretty quickly. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, because it's still positive, most of that is not fat. Most of that is water and stored carbohydrates. So we store carbohydrates in our liver and in our muscles, and when you cut them out of your diet, your body went in search of those and used them all up. Most of us store somewhere between 400, 500, 600 grams of carbs in our bodies. So within 48 hours, you had used that amount of carbs from your body. Now, each gram of carbohydrate is stored with 3 grams of water. So we've taken that, say 500, just to make it an easy number, 500 grams of carbs, and you've used it up. Times that by 3, it's at, well, 4 to add on the extra 3 grams of water. That's 2 kilos right there. So if you stood on the scales last week, Saturday, and you stood on them today, and you were 2 kilos, the majority of that is carbohydrate and water. Over the last week, your insulin level would also be coming down, and when your insulin level comes down, it forces you to lose fluid. Remember I spoke about that last week? And so all that fluid that was stored with your carbs, you would have lost by going to the toilet or sweating or whatever it was. And that's why we see such a dramatic change of weight on the scales. During this last week, that was part of it, you know. People tell, oh, suddenly they're not feeling as bloated, their stomach feels flatter, you know, they just feel better. That holding on to excess water can make you feel yuck. And so that's part of why you might start feeling, after you've gone down the dumps, when you've come back up, start feeling good again. And so that is a part of it, and it's a good thing to have lost that extra fluid and those stores. But now we want to start getting into the fat. Yeah? So most of us have been, you know, I've told you to eat as much fat as you really want, and so we've been over there. But now we've got to start finding this balance for ourselves. If we've got fat to lose, we've got to find, well, how much fat should I actually be having? So this is where these tables that I've given to you are going to come into play. So if you look at these tables, they are a guide in helping you to understand these numbers for yourself. So, the best way, if you do know your lean body mass, then you're using your lean body mass in these tables is the best reference. If you do not know what your lean body mass is, you can just use your height. How do you know your lean body mass? You might have done like a DEXA scan or an in-body scan, or just on a Tanita style scales. So all of those things will give you an estimate of what your lean body mass is. So if you don't know that, you're just going to use your height. And if you then have a look at the table, and just note that we've got quite a difference between males and females, so make sure, ladies, that you don't use the males table. We've then got a massive range. So I'll take me, 157 centimetres tall, yes, tall. And then going across, my range for fat grams is somewhere between 66 and 154 grams per day. That's massive, you know, that's a massive difference. But if I was another 30 kilos overweight and I needed to get myself down quite significantly, well then I would need to be starting as my starting point 66. All right? And I would need to go with that for a little while and see how that impacted me. Now, this is where a little bit of trial and error is going to come in for each individual as well, because if I was doing 66 grams of fat and I was having adequate protein and really low carbohydrate, but I was as hungry as could be, no good. It's too low. So one of the biggest determinants of whether you should raise your fat intake is going to be fat. So even if I had a significant amount of weight to lose, going to the lowest amount is not going to be useful if I'm hungry. Because if I'm hungry, I can only go for so long on sheer willpower, maybe a couple of weeks, and then I'm just going to go, this is too hard, and go back to what I was doing before. So my weight won't come off, or my fat loss won't be as fast, because I'll have to have more from the food rather than from my body, but it will be sustainable, and it will be realistic, and it will be something that I can stick to. And what will happen is, as I lose more and more weight, I can actually eat more and more fat. So the lighter you get, the more fat you can consume.
I just found my goal.
Yes, isn't it a motivator? It's such a motivator, because if you know, like in 10 kilos time, I can add another 10 or 20 grams, and how much easier and nicer and whatever that will make my life. But the thing is that you actually won't feel much different in terms of hunger and energy levels and all of that. It's just a palatability thing that is maybe the motivator there. Yeah. All right. So think about where you are right now and what your goals are. And then if you've got a significant amount of weight to lose, like you believe you're sitting right here on the far left-hand side, well then you're going to start on the lower side of your fat grams and work from there. But if you don't need to lose weight at all, then you're just probably not going to worry about it at all, but you're going to make sure that you are getting enough, which is pretty easy once you're eating this way. And if you're somewhere in between, well then you're going to just pick a number. And that's just how it is. There's no magic number for each individual. It's basically going, okay, my lowest is 66, my highest is 154, I'm going to try 100 and I'm going to see what happens. And if you lose weight and you're not hungry, well maybe you go, oh, let's push it a little bit, let's try 90. Let's see how that feels. And then you go 90 and you're starving hungry, but you lose 2 kilos that week, but that's not the way for you. So you go up to 100 again and you lose half a kilo the next week, but you feel great, your hunger level's controlled. Is this making sense to everybody? So there is no magic formula, but at least there's some guidelines for you to begin your own discovery. So once again, we come down to, oh, well, yes, we do need to do a little bit of weighing and measuring and estimating your fat intake. It's not as simple as just slapping on loads of butter and olive oil and cheese. We actually do, to a degree, need to be mindful of the amounts that we are having if we are trying to lose weight. If you're not trying to lose weight and you're just doing this for health and other reasons, well then, have as much fat as you desire, as long as it's not making you feel sick. But otherwise, you've got to use something like Easy Diet Diary, and you've got to start estimating your fat intake and know, because knowledge gives you power, gives you control, gives you ability to move forward. So then you can go, I'm looking at Easy Diet Diary, I can see how much fat grams I'm having in each of my meals. I know I'm sitting at 100 grams per day. I'm comfortably losing half a kilo a week. This is where I need to be. And once you've weighed and measured for like a week or so, you don't need to keep on weighing and measuring. You'll become pretty good at estimating those amounts. And if you're suddenly putting on weight, then maybe you need to weigh and measure for another week so that you can just check yourself and see that you still actually are on track. Okay. Yes?
Is being hungry normal? Like should you feel, so what is, dinner time or lunchtime or even breakfast time, should you actually feel hungry anyway? So I'm saying
Yes.
you shouldn't feel hungry, but you should feel hungry at some point.
Yes, at some point, absolutely. But you don't want to feel hungry 1 to 2 hours after eating a meal.
Right.
So a good guide is if you've eaten a meal and it's sort of adequate for you, you should not feel hunger for about 5 or 6 hours.
Okay.
Or maybe even longer. But an absolute minimum is 5 to 6 hours. So if you're finding yourself not being able to go for 5 or 6 hours without having something, a snack even, or whatever it might be, then that amount of fat, and potentially protein too, because protein will add to hunger as well, is not adequate. Okay. So 5 to 6 hours, yes, at some point you're going to go, well, it's mealtime, I haven't eaten all day, I'm hungry. Yeah, fine. All right, so that's that table. Now I'm going to leave it up there because I want to move then into a little bit of talk around protein. And I'm sure all of you have watched the protein video where I spoke about that 30 grams as a minimum. And maybe, even though I said not to this last week, maybe you've been thinking a little bit about having that 30 grams at each meal. And what you might have found is that for some of you, it was really hard to get 30 grams 3 meals a day. And the people that are probably shaking their heads are more likely smaller people or females, more so than males. And basically it is because we often don't need 3 meals of that amount of food per day. And this is where this sort of table comes into it all. So if you go back to me again at 157 centimetres and you look at what my minimum protein grams is, and I stress that that's minimum, it's 88 grams of protein. So if I had 3 meals a day at 30 grams, that's 90 already. So, you know, most days I probably go one day of 3 meals of 30 grams, and then I have a couple of days of 2 meals at 30 grams, and I can't get the third one in. I just don't have the appetite for it. Can't eat it makes me feel sick. And then I might do it again, you know. So I sort of spiral up and down from 3 meals, 2 meals, that sort of thing. And then when you look at a chart like this, it suddenly makes sense, because at my size, 3 meals at 30 grams is, you know, a lot for me. And so I most likely don't need to get that every single day, as much as that. But if you go down to, you know, a 6-foot male at 183 centimetres, his protein is 144. So the minimum 30 grams is way too low. He still needs that 30 grams to stimulate protein synthesis, but he probably needs, you know, like 45-ish grams at each meal 3 times a day just to get to his minimum. And he could potentially have more, particularly if he's active or, you know, whatever the reasons might be. So this table needs to be used in combination with the thought of that 30 grams minimum, so you can work out what your individual requirement should be. You can have more. Yes, you can have more. If you feel like you need more from a hunger point of view, and hunger goes hand in hand with fat and protein, you could play around with increasing your protein a little bit, increasing your fat, finding a little bit of a balance there. So maybe you push it up as a smaller female to 35 and you have 2 meals a day, and then on the 3rd meal you just have some sort of snacky sort of thing, or you don't have a 3rd meal at all. So it's lots and lots of this. There is no one formula, but using these tables as a guideline will help get you to your starting point. So you'll know I've got that 30 grams at each meal that I'm aiming for, plus I need to get to X or whatever your amount is. Is this making sense to everybody? Does it sound like hard work?
Does that mean if you only eat 2 meals a day, me, if I'm at like 150,
yes,
I have to eat 75 grams of
Yeah,
protein.
it does.
in 2
It does.
meals.
So if you're only able to get in your 2 meals, or that's what you're feeling like is working for you, you want to start your meal, and this comes to my next point, in order to then get this protein in. The first thing you want to think about when you're planning that meal is your protein. So the first thing that goes onto your plate is your piece of meat, or your chicken, or your fish, or your eggs, or whatever the protein source is, and then you add the other components to it. Because in the protein, you're going to have naturally occurring fat in there anyway. And so the amount of fat that you'll need to add will then vary dependent on where you are, but you can adjust that, you know, according to your hunger as well. And then you throw in some of your green list veggies, and there you go. But you want to start with your protein. So whenever you're planning your meal, you start with your protein, and then you build from there.
Is it not a good idea to have, you know, it's safe, like I'm 6 foot, so I'd be like,
Yeah.
same as you, about 144.
Yeah.
So I could have 30, or say 40 to make it 80, and then I could have another 70 for my dinner, but then it's very unbalanced. Is that not a good thing?
It's not great. So you're better off to try and have a closer balance. So you could do 35, 50, but I wouldn't go as low as 30, and then whatever that number ends up being, 70 or whatever. You're better off trying to distribute it, because your body, the amount that you require for protein synthesis to occur optimally is going to be beyond, like you're stimulated with 30 grams, but the amount that you require is going to be more than that. So if you can get that distributed over 3 meals, it's more optimal.
Mm.
Yeah, more desirable. Is there another question I heard? No? All right. So if those points are all making sense, I just wanted to speak maybe a little bit more now about hunger. Because if we go with all of this stuff that I'm talking about, it's all about controlling hunger. And it is, when we keep our carbohydrates low, suddenly we're a lot more in control of our hunger. And there's lots of talk in the low carb world, and probably you've heard talk around intermittent fasting. And just to give you a definition of maybe what intermittent fasting is, well, it's just having periods of time where you don't eat, and then periods where you do. So a very popular sort of protocol around intermittent fasting is a 16-8 protocol, which means that you don't eat for 16 hours in your day. So out of a 24-hour day, 16 hours of the day you're not eating, and then 8 hours of the day you are eating. And there are some really good reasons to do that, great reasons to do that. I don't want to complicate things today, and I've decided to speak about intermittent fasting in a lot more detail in the third and last workshop that we do. What I do want to say is that what happens mostly when you do low carb is that you just bring in this sort of intermittent fasting without even recognizing it. So it just sort of happens without you forcing it. So when people do intermittent fasting and they're not low carb, they force that 16 hours and they eat for 8 hours, or in the 8-hour window. And it's quite hard to do that. But when you are doing low carb and your hunger's really well controlled, you might have eaten dinner the night before at say 6 o'clock. You wake up the next morning and you're not feeling hungry, so you don't eat anything. And then next thing it's 11 or 12 o'clock, and if you calculate that, you have gone this extended period of time, and therefore you are actually intermittent fasting. So we're getting the benefit of that without even recognizing it. Now there's no one protocol of intermittent fasting that is better than another. So, some people might wake up in the morning, they are hungry, so you have breakfast, but then you have a big enough breakfast so that you don't feel hungry for the rest of the day. So you've had breakfast at like 7 a.m. and then you go the whole day until 6 or 7 p.m. and you eat dinner, and that's all you've had, and then so you've got like 11 gap. There's benefit in that too. So there's no one protocol that's going to work, but what my recommendation at this point is to really hone in on your hunger. So for people who have dieted all their lives, it's such a hard concept to get your head around, because diets typically say, eat this now and eat this then and eat this later, and there's all these set points about how to do things. But what I'm saying to you is don't do any of that. Really try and hone in and listen to your hunger, and when you are hungry, eat. And if you are not hungry, then don't. And when you do that, you bring a degree of intermittent fasting into your day. And intermittent fasting in its most basic form is not snacking. Is having breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you have 5 or 6 hours between each of those, and then you have a big gap overnight. You know, if the whole population out there just did that, there would be a massive shift in health and weight. You know, just that. Because the impact that has on our systems in terms of our insulin resistance is massive. So if that's all you do, and that's in response to your hunger, then great. But if you're not hungry for lunch, then that might be extended. Or if you're not hungry for breakfast, that might be extended. Or you get to dinner and you're not really hungry, well, then you might go from lunch to breakfast the next day. So really listening to your body is what this is all about. It completely changes the paradigm of eating. So the way that we have been brought up to think, you know, breakfast snack, lunch snack, you know, even at school we've got, you know, it's even called healthy snack time. And you stop after being at school for an hour or an hour and a half or something and have something to eat. And then a little bit later you have recess and you have something to eat again. And then you have lunch and you have something to eat. And then you come home from school and you have something to eat. And then you have, you know, just the way that everything has been built is around this whole snacking culture. And we want to try and get ourselves away from that as much as possible.
And during the fasting, what about drinking?
Water is fine. So anything that basically doesn't have any calories in it. So water, herbal tea, mineral water, soda water, that's what you want to have during that fasting period. People were asking about broth at this stage. You could have broth, but there's 2 ways of having broth. If you were incorporating broth into a meal, then you keep all the fat. You don't skim it. So if you make broth at home, you don't skim the fat off. If you're having broth as something in between meals, then the fat is off, so that you don't have calories there, or minimal, absolute minimal. But, you know, in between meals, you shouldn't require broth. There's another whole area of fasting where people, you know, who require this might fast for extended periods of time, you know, 3 days and even longer without eating, and I'm not recommending that at this point for anyone. That is very much on an individual basis, and that's when broth becomes important from an electrolyte point of view. But in between meals, no, it's not. All right, does anyone have any questions around any of that? No. Okay, good. So I've got a couple of other things on my list here that I wanted to go through. I'll quickly show you what you will be getting this week in your folders. So you'll have that in there, so you can print off another copy should you require it. You'll also get a whole list of some new recipes, so if you're getting a bit bored or weren't excited by some of the others, there's a whole list of other ones in there. These are sort of a lot of my favourite ones. They're all, again, referenced with the recipe guide so that you can work your way through them and make sure if they're suitable or not. Some of them have with them nutritional information and some of them don't. So some of them have, like per serve, what it will actually give you, but not every single one of them. So you can use that. There's also a second meal plan in here. So if you are the sort of person who likes to just follow a meal plan and not think too hard, there is a meal plan, and all of those recipes have been provided. So if you want to, and you're feeling like you just need to do another week like you've just done, well then there's a meal plan for you to follow. And the last thing in here is, I find these bonus recipes really useful because they're the sort of things that are often missed in our diet. So we've got marinades, sauces, dips and dressings in this one, and there's a heap of them that you can then modify with your own little bits and pieces of spices and herbs and whatever you like. Some of them have orange next to them, so you want to be a little bit cautious, like the sweet chili sauce for example, but it's still there and it's better, a million times better than the one you might purchase from the supermarket. Okay, so that's all of that. What I did mention last week, and what I haven't spoken about yet today, is the red list. So you've all got the red list, whether you've got it with you today or just sitting in a folder at home or on your computers. The red list we didn't speak about. All I said was just basically avoid everything on that list. So I just wanted to mention some of the things on that list and why we are staying away from them, and why at this point I guess this is really important. And it all comes down to two things. Number one is insulin, and number two is inflammation. So if something is potentially not going to cause an insulin spike, but it is going to cause an inflammatory response in your body, well, we don't really want to have that. Why? Well, remember last week I said there's something in common with all lifestyle diseases, and that was raised levels of insulin. There is one other thing, and that is raised inflammatory markers. So most people who are unwell, or all people who are unwell, have raised inflammatory markers. So if you just get a cold and you go to the doctor and they do something called a CRP, so they do a blood test and they measure something called a CRP, this is your C-reactive protein, it will be really high. So you've got a cold, you're all snotty and full of flu, that level will be really high. And that's because your body has reacted and is trying to get rid of the cold by increasing all these inflammatory markers. If you are not sick in inverted commas, and you go to the doctor and you have a random blood test, like for your annual checkup or something like that, and your CRP level is raised, well, that is a big red light going off. And that is saying to you that there's something going on in your body that shouldn't be going on. Your inflammatory levels are way higher than they should be. And lots of things can contribute to this, but food can contribute hugely to this. So really interesting for me is that I've always sort of had blood tests every now and then. When I was doing triathlon for many years, I was always really low in iron, so I was always getting my blood checked. And they always did a CRP, but I didn't even know what it was. And then when I got into this way of eating, and I had a blood test done, and I saw, my CRP was undetectable, right, very happy, but I thought, I'll go back and I'll have a look at what my CRP was previously. And when I was doing triathlons, I was eating a very high carbohydrate diet. I was eating whilst training, I would be having sports drinks, Gatorades, gels, carbohydrate-rich gels, even lollies out on long rides and runs. Our diet was packed full of breads and pastas and all that sort of stuff because that's what gave us energy. And my CRP was through the roof. Through the roof. So whether that was as a result of all the food I was eating or the stress I was putting my body under by doing that amount of training or a combination of both, but my body basically then was not in a happy place. And every few months I would get a different injury, you know, plantar fasciitis, and then my hip was sore, and then my shoulder was aching, and then, you know, and there was always something, and it never quite got better. And you look back now and you go, well, your body's completely inflamed. How on earth could you expect for things to recover and improve? And so foods that cause inflammation in our body. Number one, the biggest cause of inflammation in our body is sugar. Specifically, the fructose component of sugar. So sugar is made up, we call it, you know, the scientific word is sucrose, and sucrose is made up of 50% glucose and 50% fructose. We, even though our bodies might not like glucose, we at least have the whole physiological structure to deal with it. So we know what to do with it. But fructose, on the other hand, we have very limited capacity to deal with it. And our body goes into freak out mode, basically, if we have too much of it. And it causes a lot of damage on many levels, and it causes a great deal of inflammation. Fructose, sugar. So eat too much sugar, which you'll find on the red list, and that will happen. Same goes, you know, for sugar substitutes. So there are many things out there that people say, oh, well, I'm not having sugar, I'm just putting coconut sugar or agave or all of these other types of naturally occurring sugar. Well, at the end of the day, they are all some sort of combination of glucose and fructose. Some of them are actually worse because they are higher in fructose. Like agave, for example, is about 70–80% fructose and then 20–30% glucose. So it's worse, but it's sold as a health food product. So any type of sugar or sugar substitute, we do not want to be having. The next thing on that list are grains. And the next thing on my list for inflammation is grain. And if you speak to some people, they'll tell you, well, it's not all grains, it's gluten-containing grains, and it's the gluten component that we should be weary of. And there used to be in the medical fraternity, and there is still a lot of this belief, that it's either you cannot tolerate gluten and you have celiac disease, or you can. Black and white. And it's not as simple as that. There is all this grey mush in between those two. And most of us fit somewhere along in this grey mush, and we can't tolerate gluten as well as we thought we were able to. Gluten has also changed dramatically in its structure. It used to be very different. The way that we have genetically modified plants makes gluten a completely different type of particle to what it was before. It damages our gut, and by damaging our gut, it allows particles into our bloodstream that shouldn't be coming in. When we damage our gut, if you think about it, you've got your gut wall, which should sit like this, nice and tight. And so when things come into your digestive system and they want to come through to the other side, they've got to be teeny tiny to fit through these teeny tiny gaps. When we eat gluten, it causes these gaps to come apart. And all of a sudden we get things, large particles that shouldn't be in our blood. And when that happens, our body responds by becoming inflamed. We have antigen type responses, inflammatory type responses. So gluten being the worst of the worst, so if you are going to eat grains, maybe your kids, you want to give them gluten-free grains. But if you are going to avoid altogether, then you're probably better off. And for us right now, grains are just too high in carbohydrate anyway, they're going to spark an insulin response. So even if they're all right from an inflammatory response, they're going to cause the insulin response. So grains are on that list, red list. The last one that makes up the majority of that list, or the last part of that list, are oils that are not naturally occurring. So these are our seed oils like sunflower seed oil and canola and safflower and grapeseed oil. You know, all of the oils that used to get the heart foundation tick, which is non-existent anymore. That tick is gone because it was representing so many bad things. So why are these oils? Well, first of all, they are not naturally occurring. We go back to what I've said right at the start. It was we want to eat things that are available to us in nature. These oils are not available to us in nature. In order to get the oil in that form, the seed needs to be highly, highly processed by man, going through massive sorts of processing plants in order to get that oil. But besides that, when we look at the end product of that oil, it is very, very high in what we call the polyunsaturated fat omega-6. Now, what's that? So your omega-3s, you've probably all heard of omega-3s, fish oils, you know, and it's pushed out there in the community. Eat lots and lots of fish so you can get your omega-3s up, and if you can't, or even if you do, then still take omega-3 supplements so that we can boost your levels. And that message is actually a good message because in our bodies we should have a balance. So take you one step back quickly. If you take a biopsy of fat from somebody's body, you will be able to see what they've been eating. So you will then be able to get, you know, the balance of omega-3 and omega-6 in their diet by looking at their fat. So what we should see is that we've got a balance of 1-to-1. We should have this nice 1-to-1 balance. Why? Because why are omega-3s pushed? Omega-3s are pushed because they are anti-inflammatory. Eat your omega-3s because you are also inflamed. This is a message out to the world. So eat your omega-3s to help bring down your inflammation. But everything in nature has to be balanced, so we've got omega-6s. Omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. They promote inflammation. So we need this 1-to-1 balance in our bodies. Why? Because if we do get a cold or we do cut ourselves, we need to have an inflammatory response. So we need some of it. So we need a 1-to-1 so that we balance out beautifully. So it was estimated at one point that this balance was doing this and the omega-6s were going up, and we're sitting at about a 3-to-1 omega-6 in favour of omega-6. And we were still sort of coping. But the latest stats have come in, and this number has gone up and up and up and up. And it sits somewhere between 15-to-1 to 20-to-1. So most of us have 20 times more omega-6s in our body than we do omega-3s. Why are we inflamed? Right here, that's why. And then people go, I don't even have in my cupboard canola oil or sunflower or safflower. I don't cook with that stuff. The problem is, every single packaged item in the supermarket has it in it. Every single sauce, salad dressing, mayonnaise, dip, bread, breakfast cereal, some of your spices, anything. You start walking up and down the aisles of your supermarket and read them. And if they don't have an oil in them, they will have sugar. And so what do? You eat real food that doesn't have a label, that you know what it has in it. So that's why those three things make up that list there. All to do with inflammation and insulin resistance. So hopefully that's made you want to avoid those things a little bit more and given you a little bit of more motivation to do the stuff that we've been talking about. And that brings me to the end of today. So if we've got any other questions, please shoot. Yes?
Sorry, I just need clarification. So does fat adapted equate to ketosis? Like, are you fat adapted when you're in ketosis only?
Not necessarily. So some people might never get their ketone levels high, but they are still burning fat very effectively.
So how do you know you're fat adapted?
Well, if you're eating extremely low carb and your adequate amount of protein and the rest is made up of fat and you are achieving your goals, you are fat adapted. Yeah. So you don't have to have those high levels of ketones, and for some people they never will. And having high levels of ketones doesn't necessarily equate with weight loss or better health. There's only a very small percentage of people who must have high levels of ketones, and those people are people who suffer from epilepsy. If their ketone levels are high, their seizures are better controlled, and so you push ketones in them. You do anything and everything to get ketone levels up. But for most of us sitting here, we're just trying to lose weight, be healthier. It's not about a high level of ketone, it's about attaining your goals. All right, guys. Well, there's always space on the forum, so there's been a few questions there, but keep them coming because it's great to get those questions, because when somebody else asks it, you often go, oh, I didn't think about that, so please keep them coming. And that's it from a presentation or workshop for the next few weeks, so please use the forum so that you don't feel alone. And we're all there helping each other along, so that's where we can still be together when we're not here. So that's it from me, and thanks for coming along.